That joke isn't funny anymore. Available on Amazon and everywhere. Hey guys, welcome back to the Lou Perez podcast. I'm your host, Lou Perez, and I'm joined today by a comedian, a friend. You can see him at the comic strip, in particular with his show, Comfy Comedy. And if you guys are interested in traveling to Sussex County, New Jersey, Saturday, January 25th, he'll be doing a show with me at the Sparta Avenue Stage at 8 p.m. Again, Saturday, January 25th. 8 p.m. Sparta Avenue Stage. I'll have all that information in my description, links below and all that. But ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Mr. Peter Stewart.
Thank you for having me. Looking forward to it.
And Peter, I hope you respect the fact that, I used a little French there.
I do respect that. Your timing is very good to have a Canadian on, given what's happening north of the border right now.
Yeah. So I originally wanted to have you on as a way, definitely to talk to you in depth about you, life, career, and all that, and also to plug the show that we're doing together. And then Trudeau leaves. What does that mean? What's going on up north?
Yeah, so I think it means a lot of relief for a lot of people. So, I mean, Trudeau's been in power for, I think, a decade, and we use a 5-year election cycle in Canada, and our system is built on the British system. So basically, if you lose a vote at any point in Parliament, we immediately have to go to an election. So we have 4 main parties. We've got the Liberals, of which Trudeau is the leader, or was until yesterday. We have the Conservatives, who would be the equivalent of like the Republicans in Canada. We have the NDP, which is a smaller party that is pretty far left. And then we have the Bloc Québécois, which is a very unique Canadian party. And basically, it would have taken the NDP, the Bloc, and the Conservatives to all vote together to get rid of the Liberals. And I think Trudeau finally lost the support of the NDP and lost support within his party. So he's taking a step back, which most Canadians are very happy about.
Yeah. And so who steps in? Then?
That is a good question. That is undecided. So unlike the Democrats here, they're not just going to appoint somebody. They're going to have a competitive process, or at least that's what they say they're going to do. Next election in Canada is scheduled for October. So they're going to have to do something before then. But current projections have the Conservatives just running them over like a massive majority.
So you live in the States. You lived in the States for a while. Do you still vote in Canada? Like, can you do mail-in? How do you do that? Do you have to go across the border to vote and then come back?
No, so you can do mail-in. That was not always the case until I think about 10 years ago. If you had been gone long enough, you weren't able to vote. But yeah, I can vote now. And it's kind of an interesting setup because, similar to how you have swing states here, we have swing ridings. So I am from what is a swing riding. So, your vote, it's not really fair, but your vote has a bit more value when you're in swing riding.
Wow. Something I just realized about Trudeau, and you said that he was in power for about a decade, is that most world leaders, if you look at them at the start of their tenure and the end of it, it ages them like insanely. Like Barack Obama,
Yep.
served 2 terms, 8 years. You'd say like only 8 years, and it aged him. It's rather just apparent how much it aged him. Trudeau, though, still looks like a young man. So I don't know what that says about either his bloodline, his who he made a deal with, or just him as a leader.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can probably thank the people at Just for Men for that, because he's got some gray creeping into the beard. But yeah, I mean, that's part of his appeal, right? It was a little bit, if the previous prime minister was a guy, he was a conservative. His name was Stephen Harper. And this guy, I mean, in my opinion, he was a good prime minister, but this guy looked like your accountant, like very square. And Trudeau just kind of came with new energy that I guess inspired people for a while. But yeah, it was a bit like Nixon Kennedy, right, back in the day. So people who saw the debates live all thought that Kennedy won because they were impressed by his vibe. But who would have been the better president? I think it's a different question. But yeah, so lots of women still like him in Canada, but I think most people are just tired of his ridiculous policies.
Yeah, and I almost forgot about the whole blackface thing.
Yeah.
I forget which comedian had pointed it out when he was asked about blackface. He wasn't able to say how many times he may have done it. You know?
Yeah, that's always suspect. Usually the answer would be one, right? So
yeah, it's like, oh, I was young and it was a party and it was a mistake and never happened again. when you start having to look up and you're like, wait, there was this one. Let me check my calendar.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty egregious. I don't know if you ever watched Pee-wee's Playhouse, but they had a character, Zombie, who was like just kind of a floating head in a box, and it definitely gave those vibes. I mean, the guy, his credentials, other than the fact that his daddy was the prime minister, like this guy was a high school drama teacher. It's not like he was, on the world.
Was he really?
Yeah,
really?
Yeah. I think I don't know exactly what grade, but yeah, that's what his background was, and so I mean that's why he has charisma, but he doesn't have a whole lot of policy behind it.
Wow, that's amazing. That seems like something someone would make up about Trudeau to describe him. Like, oh, he must have been like a drama teacher at some point.
Yeah, no, it's 100% legit. And I mean, I'm not sure if people in the US would know this, but so maybe 2 or 3 years before he became prime minister, he actually boxed against a conservative senator. Like they organized a boxing match, and that was kind of his level. So it's, not necessarily a diplomat. They boxed, I think, in a Hampton Inn conference center. So, high stakes. But
how did he do?
He won. I'll give him credit. He trained. I think he beat the guy up pretty good. So
yeah. That's something that I've noticed over the years, where you'll have people who think that if they're on the right, that somehow just being on the right makes you tough and being able to fight. But the reality is, I mean, your political enemies, there's a possibility they could still fuck you up. Like I remember.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Like I remember Chris Cuomo, who used to host a show on CNN. I forget where he is now. But he's like, he's kind of like a big meathead Italian dude from New York. He might be from like a kind of more upstate New York or whatever. But he was, like a card carrying Democrat, more, on the left. And, I remember like guys, on the right talking about him, like, like online, calling him like a pussy and stuff like that. It's like, no, I think this dude would fuck you up. Like this, like yeah. I would be fine, I guess, getting into a debate with Chris Cuomo if I had to. But if it was between having a debate and having a fist fight with this dude, no, I don't want to have a fist fight with him.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is just where you come from, right? Which is kind of surprising about Trudeau, because obviously his dad was also prime minister, and he would have been a private school guy. But yeah, I think he trained really hard for it. But yeah, I mean, excellent point. Like, I don't think it matters left or right. Some people can fight, and some people, it's like guns, right? Everybody assumes that everybody on the right is a proud gun owner. So lots of people on the left who have guns who would be just as dangerous in a situation, right? So.
Yeah, I think it was Joe Rogan who brought up the example. You have like you have a dude who's like, yo, I'm from Brooklyn. And it's like, yeah, but this wrestler from Iowa will fucking destroy you.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
This fucking farm boy from Iowa will, ragdoll you and, put you into the concrete. So you talked about how where you're from is like a write-in swing write-in. How'd you describe it?
Yes. So we're divided, instead of like counties, we're divided into what are called ridings. And so I forget the exact count, but there's like 350 or something. And so if you have a majority, you can basically do whatever you want. If you don't get a majority, you have to work with other parties, because if they band together, they can boot you anytime they want.
How do you spell that? Write-in? Is it right?
Riding, like RIDING.
Riding. Okay.
Yeah.
There we go. And so like, where are you from in Canada?
So I am from Cambridge, Ontario, which is about an hour and 10 minutes southwest of Toronto.
Okay. And is it, is it like farm country, oil? Like, what do you guys?
It's kind of, I think we're far enough away that we wouldn't call ourselves a suburb of Toronto, but I mean, it's got about 100,000 people. Our neighboring town, which is Waterloo, has a couple of universities. So sort of the Tri-City area has maybe 500,000 people, which, I mean, population of Canada is only about 40 million. So that's pretty big. But yeah, very suburban.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I gotta ask everyone this. Did you grow up? Did you play hockey growing up?
No, not really. I can skate. I played the most Canadian sport of all, which is curling. So I played that at a pretty high level.
Oh, did you?
Yep. So I just came back. I was there over the holidays, but I was playing in a tournament in my hometown. So.
Wow. Well, before we get into curling, yeah, I bring up the hockey because I played ice hockey as a kid, probably from age of like 6 or 7 all the way up through, I think it was like 17 or something. And now my son, my wife and I, we brought our kids to skate for the first time a couple weeks ago, and I hadn't been on the ice in a while, and it just being there, having to rent skates. And like meanwhile, I used to own own my own skates and all that. And I was like, it was having these, kind of throwback to just how great of a skater I was, and how I would be, just cutting up the ice and all that. So my oldest is going to start lessons this Wednesday night that I'm really excited about. So like on the curling front, I remember it was probably like what 3 or 4 Winter Olympics ago where curling like blew up, and people just fucking loved watching it, and people started playing.
U.S. won a gold medal. I think it was 2018. Where were I forget where the 2018 Olympics were, but yeah, they won a gold medal out of nowhere. They beat the Canadians in the semis, and then I think they beat the Swedes in the final. So totally out of nowhere, a bunch of guys from I think they're from Minnesota.
From Minnesota, that would make sense, I think. So when did you get into it? When did you start playing?
So I watched curling in the Nagano Olympics, which would have been 98. So I was 8 at the time. And then just went over to my parents took me to the local curling club. So my grandparents curled, and usually it's kind of a family thing because people just don't get introduced to it. But my dad hated it, so he never curled. But then I wanted to try it, so he took me over, and that's kind of where it started. But
yeah. So you said that you got like a pretty high level. What does that mean? Like how high are you going?
I think the furthest we ever went was in junior mixed. So mixed is 2 men, 2 women, and we were 2 wins away from winning a provincial championship. So
wow.
Yeah, that was a great run. That was a lot of fun. But yeah, obviously moved to the US, so there's not as much curling here, although there are a couple clubs that I play at once in a while. And just work and stuff, it kind of takes away from it, right?
Yeah. I imagine too, like being in New York, ice time is probably really tough to find, right? Because if either people are doing free skating, or people are playing, men's, club hockey or high school hockey, and then I mean, do you even do it on the rink? Do you even do it on a rink?
Well, so it's a weird one. So you don't wear skates, right? You're wearing shoes that have kind of gripper material on them. But yeah, so I used to play and be an instructor out at the Brooklyn, I think it was called the Brooklyn Hillside Curling Club, which is in Prospect Park. So it was an outdoor ice rink that they would do up for curling. And curling is a game where the ice really, really matters, and the quality of the ice. Like if you have bad ice, it can just totally destroy the game. And I remember going out there one night, and I think it was, so it was 18 degrees Celsius, which I guess is about 68 Fahrenheit. Oh, and geez. You couldn't even sweep because you would do one rep with your broom and it would just be covered in frost. Like the conditions were really nasty. And I just kind of got to the point, I was like, it's far enough away from, the curling I'm used to. I kind of stopped playing. But they love their curling in Brooklyn, and they've got their clubs in, Plainfield, New Jersey, and Ardsley on Hudson. So I go out there probably once a year to play. So
yeah. And what's the lifespan like for a curler? Could like an Olympic curler, could he or she be curling all the way through their 50s? Is that how?
I'd say 50 is probably starting to push it. You see a lot of guys retire around there, but we had one guy in Canada, his name's Glenn Howard, and the guy played till he was about 61. Like, it was crazy. And he kind of went from being like a top 2 team in the country to maybe like a top 10 team in the country. But yeah, the longevity was crazy. If you're a skip, which is the guy who calls the strategy, you've got way more runway. If you're a front end guy who has to sweep, then you've got to be in pretty good shape. And I would say they fade a little bit faster, but you play well into your 40s.
Yeah. And just the racial stereotypes in me. I feel like Latin Americans could if they got into it, because the sweeping, the housekeepers, they could really make a big move for it.
That's not even really so a lot of countries are trying to get into it, and to say Canada has lost its curling dominance is definitely not an understatement. All these other countries are showing up, and they've got good athletes doing it. And I think we're starting to find out that, we have a lot of the history. All our best athletes are playing hockey. So they're not at the curling rink. Yeah.
I mean, well, then, what Canada has to do? Canada needs to get some fucking Bob Proberts and some, some goons and just start beating the shit out of people.
I mean, you would not believe, even back to juniors, everybody thinks curling, it's kind of hokey or whatever. Fights in locker rooms and all sorts of stuff. I've never seen it break out on the ice before, but yeah, you get anything at a high level and people want to fight, right?
Yeah. Ryan Long, a comedian and one of your countrymen, he had this short video he did with Danny Polishchuk, talking about hockey players talking shit. It comparing hockey players talking to shit to Drake talking shit.
Yeah.
And how Drake's talking shit and what the hockey players are saying, I'll tumble you like an old sweat sock, or something like that. And it's there's actually some violence behind that is definitely doable, as opposed to Drake trying to sound hard. I'm fucking it up. My bad, Ryan and Danny, if you see this.
It's and I cannot think of a softer Canadian than Drake. So I'm sure whatever he's saying, that's the opposite of what the hockey players are saying.
Do you do any stand-up bits about curling? Do you ever talk about that?
So I've had a few over the years. They don't do that well. I had a bit about going on the New York subway out to Brooklyn with my curling broom and the way that different races would react to me. So basically, white people would act like they were really annoyed that you had this. They didn't know what it was, and they were just they didn't want any part of it, basically. Asian people acted like you were walking around with an AK-47. And Black people treated me like I was a wizard. So that was, that's the only one I've ever tried. But yeah.
This white boy's casted spells.
I mean, honestly, it wasn't that far off, man. When a couple, I remember they're probably 16, 17, and a couple Black guys kind of came to the side of the rink and were watching it. And they were so into it. It was crazy. They were acting like I was draining threes like Steph Curry or something. It was nuts. So
what's the difference between a regular broom and a curling broom?
So a curling broom has a synthetic head, so it doesn't have a hair head. In the old days, they used to use hair heads, but so it's got a synthetic pad, and it's designed to be as light but as strong as possible, so that you can get as many reps in as possible. So I don't know if they're still made of carbon fiber, but that was a big breakthrough when we went to carbon fiber brooms. And we're coming up, believe it or not, on the 10-year anniversary of what was called Broomgate. And so basically we found out that for the history of the sport, we were sweeping wrong, and it was having the opposite effect. So, really sophisticated sport. Yeah. So I was always taught that sweeping a rock will make it go faster and straighter. And the faster part is correct, but it turns out the straighter part was not correct. So depending on which direction you were sweeping in, you could actually make it curl more or curl less. And there was a year where everybody figured this out, and it kind of ruined the game. So it was called Broomgate.
So what do you do? What's the response been to Broomgate?
Well, so basically, I don't want to say guys were cheating because it was within the rules, but if you use a really hard foam and a really rough pad, you can basically scratch the ice. And if you scratch the ice, you can kind of make the rock do whatever you want. And it basically took a lot of the skill out of the throwing part of the game, because if you threw it a bad one, your sweepers could just bring it back anywhere they wanted. So it was a big controversy, and there's actually one going on right now. So the heads have to be tested for firmness, and the World Curling Federation, who in my opinion are a bunch of idiots, a European organization governing what is basically a Canadian game, right?
Fuck that.
Yeah. So don't get me. If you want a really niche rant, don't get me started on the World Curling Federation. But
one, I definitely want that. And also I really hope that as we're talking about this, because I'm seriously interested in all this, I hope you develop all this stuff and do it on stage, because
Oh,
all this shit is gold. Like,
okay, yeah. I mean, maybe I'll try to bring it back. I don't know.
Yeah.
So basically, what happened was the World Curling Federation is now in charge of like saying which broom heads are allowed. And in Canada, we have like 3 or 4 companies that sell broom heads, and that would be a big part of their revenue. So the company that tests for the World Curling Federation went out of business and didn't tell the World Curling Federation. So the World Curling Federation suddenly had to do the test themselves. And I think they accidentally passed a broom that was like way past the specifications. So now that company's like, well, you told us these were fine and we're selling them to people. So like, you're hurting our business if you suddenly say these aren't fine, because that's all we made. But the competitors are like, well, no competitive player is going to use our brooms because you basically let these cheater brooms through, right? So it's a huge disaster. Like, any organ. So I think 90% of the curling clubs in the world are in Canada, and there is very, very little Canadian representation on the World Curling Federation. And it's the EU of curling, like unelected people doing bad things to the sport.
And I just imagine it's gonna, if it's probably its own mini version of FIFA. Like, there's probably just so much corruption and all that, like even on a smaller scale.
Yeah, they pick where should the World Championships be held. I get you're trying to grow the game, so they alternate, right? Every other year they're in Canada, but they will pick locations. I remember, I think it was 2014.
Qatar in Qatar.
Well, we're not that far off. They played them in Riga, Latvia once, and there was a leak in the ceiling. So water was dripping onto the ice. And it's like the world, and it sounds funny, but like in hockey, that wouldn't matter that much. But in curling, that's a serious issue. Like, that's a whole part of the ice you can't play to now. And yeah, it's wild. I understand their mandate to grow the game, but I think we could have sharper people doing it. I mean, there have been times, again, very niche, but I'm like, why is Curling Canada still affiliated with these idiots? We should just withdraw. But
yeah. Well, I think maybe now that Trudeau's gone, you get a ballsy prime minister in there to say, we're out.
Yeah, I mean, that would be a really good role for Trudeau, actually. Some people say he's going to be like an ambassador to, the Bahamas or some nice place. But yeah, CEO of the World Curling Federation, that's about his speed. So
I was just thinking, like, I wonder I wonder your feelings on Quidditch, because it's another broom sport, but it's fictional.
Yeah, I think, I don't know. I've never played it. The hipsters in Brooklyn seem to like it, so it probably is a legit competitor to curling in Brooklyn for the type of people you have playing. So
right, so it's like curling in the winter, Quidditch in the spring, the summer, and the really warm winters.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Well, something I wanted to talk to you about. Yourself being from Canada, I brought up a couple other of your paisanos. It seems like Canada and comedy, like, I wonder if, like, per capita, Canadians are the funniest people. Because I look at, I just look at the legendary comedians that I know and love, and you're all Canadian, like Norm Macdonald, my buddy Scott Thompson from the Kids in the Hall.
Yep.
SCTV. I mean, it's just unreal, just the amount of comedians that you guys produce.
Yeah, so I've noticed it in, like, basically a lot of, like, former British colonies, like lots of funny Australians, lots of funny, New Zealanders, but Canada's very unique. There are incredibly funny comics in Canada that never want to leave, and no one outside of Canada knows who they are. I think one of the challenges with the Canadian scene is, like, if you really want to make it big, you kind of have to leave, right? Because there's lots of Canadian content, like on the CBC and stuff like that. But yeah, we have a culture. We have an interesting culture too, because Atlantic Canada is not the same as Quebec, is not the same as Ontario, is not the same as the prairies. A lot of our best comics actually come from Atlantic Canada and specifically Newfoundland, because it's it's just kind of, I don't know, they know how to laugh at things, and they're not, like, I think a big part of comedy is being able to laugh at yourself, right? And if you have a very big ego, you're probably not going to be a great comic, because we've all got flaws that are funny, right? Mm-hmm. So
yeah. Oh my God, Jim Carrey. I mean, really, you guys could have just produced Jim Carrey, and that would have been enough for late 20th century comedy, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge Jim Carrey fan, but same thing. So he was from Scarborough, and I don't know if you know his story, but like, so I think his dad worked in accounting and lost his job, and like they were basically living out of their car. I'm not sure for how long. So yeah, but Jim Carrey, great example. Like, had to go to LA. Gets on sketch shows, gets into movies, and then he takes off. And that path is not really possible if you stay in Canada. So.
Yeah. And when I was living in LA, I used to run a room in Echo Park called Uncle Lou's Safe Place, and there were a number of Canadians who had moved to LA, and they were playing my room, where some nights you have 10 people, maybe some nights you have 5, and then and sometimes most of the audience were the open mic comedians waiting for the open mic that to happen afterwards, which I also hosted. And then I would, then they would show me these pictures of them playing these sold out theaters in Canada, and it's like, holy shit, what a.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it is, especially for small towns, right? Like every small town in Canada has like a Tim Hortons, a Subway, and a curling club, right? But they don't it's a big deal if a comedy show comes there, and people are going to come out because it's a novelty, right? And then in New York or LA, there's 10 going on in a 3-block radius, so people care a lot less.
Yeah, and so you and I, we first met because I produced a show with our friend Hatem Gabber at the Williams Center in Rutherford, New Jersey, and you've been a regular on that for probably like a year, right? We've been
even probably a little longer. I think a year and a half.
Yeah, a little longer than that. Yeah, and so you and I were talking like back and forth on Instagram, and last year I got to open for Rob Schneider at a few shows on the road, and the first one that I did was in Atlantic City, and I think it was like the show before. I don't know if you were on that show, but the one in Jersey, I did. I think there were 6 people in the audience. Yep. So then I went from performing in front of 6 people to performing, I think it was over 1,200 people opening for Schneider. And then I think it was like the next week it was back to maybe 11 people. And it was just so funny, the different levels. And I was hosting, I think, the shows in Jersey, so it was probably doing different some different material, but it's just funny how that works.
Yeah, I mean, I remember that show, and one thing that's nice about comedy, right? A good 10 people who want to be there is still a fun room. But yeah, I mean, to get to do a 1,200 person show, like opening for Rob Schneider, like that must have just been next level, like a level of laughter you just can't get in a comedy club because there's just so many more people, right?
Yeah, and then being able to go and do my 12 to 15 minutes and then come off and then get to watch him for an hour plus, just murder. That it was definitely a highlight of my 2024 year. And some like you said about you could if you're performing for a small group of people who want to be there and are enjoying it, it could be a lot of fun. The weirdest shows, and I think the last one of the year that I hosted, it had this vibe where the audience wasn't laughing. They weren't giving anything up for me, for the other comedians. And, I was calling it out too. Like, I mean, have to, as a host, it's like, you gotta try to break in and say like, oh, what are we doing here, everybody? And then afterward, nearly everybody in the audience said, "Oh, thank you so much. That was so great."
Yeah,
it's like, what the fuck is? It's like, what were you doing?
My parents say that when they come down and they're like, "We're enjoying the show, but we just don't laugh out loud. But we're sitting there and smiling and all this stuff." And as a performer, you're like, "Well, that's great, but it doesn't help." Like comedy. There's nothing worse than comedy when you're bombing, right? And you're saying you're just like, everybody in this room hates me. And I mean, the show we do at the Williams Center, it's very dark after about that second row of seats. So you can't see what's going on. Right. And if you're not getting that audio feedback, you just assume you're bombing, right? So
I opened for Rich Voss at the Williams Center at the comedy festival we produced there, and I was talking to him, and he was telling me about the audiences in Edinburgh, Scotland. So I guess he had gone over there to to do stand up, and he says they're so quiet because they're treating what you're doing as a show, as you know. And he's he's a stand up comic, so it must have been, it's just very weird for him, and he's also just another murderer. So I remember as a kid, he was on Last Comic Standing first season, and I was maybe 10 or 11 at the time, and I remember he got to the finals, and the guy was on a different level. So I brought up to him when I saw him. I remember from that. I guess it was the first year of Last Comic Standing, and there was one episode where all the contestants had to pitch a sitcom, and Voss, I thought, had an amazing idea for a sitcom. It's obviously stuck with me for like 20 years, and it was he is recently divorced, and he moves into the basement of his divorce. His wife lives in the house, and he lives in the basement, and that's And I'm like, that's I think that would be a great show. And then they treated it on Last Comic Standing as if that was a bad idea or whatever, but I thought it would have been a great show.
I mean, probably like NBC executives being like, oh, that's a bad idea, and then writing it down. You know what I mean? Like, we don't have to give any credit away, but yeah.
Right, exactly. So one of the things so you're in the US, you're Canadian, you're an immigrant. And I wanted to talk to you about, what has your process been like, coming from Canada, immigration, how long, what you're on a visa, a green card, and don't do it. And you don't say anything that's going to implicate you in any lawsuits or. I did it the 100% above board way, everything. So I came here in 2013. And so at that time, there was a visa, which was called the TN visa, that was covered under NAFTA. So it was primarily for Canadians coming here and Mexicans coming here under certain jobs. So my background is I qualified under a mathematician. So I'm an actuary. Wow. Yeah, I'm an actuary by background. So I was on that visa for 5 years, something like that. And then I got switched to an H-1B, which is better. So believe it or not, with that first visa, every time you cross into the United States, that border guard can decide whether you get to come in ever again or not. So if they really wanted to, they can blow up your whole life, right? Really? Wow.
Yeah, which is wild. And listen, I would say 90% of my interactions with border guards are neutral or good. But once in a while, you would hit a guy and he was just being a jerk and you didn't know why, right? So then I moved to an H-1B visa, which is issued by the Department of Labor. So they became
Indian for those purposes.
I'm sure there were some Indian people and some Chinese people who weren't thrilled that a Canadian got one of those visas because they don't, for those those viewers who may not know. So there aren't that many H-1B visas to go around each year, and it's a lottery system. Which is very frustrating. I have friends who had to go into the lottery like 6 times, and you just got unlucky, right? So I was on that for a while, and then I applied for my green card at possibly the worst time in history, which was about a month before COVID. So everything got put on ice, and it was So when you're in the green card process, there's one part of the process you're not allowed to leave the country. Like I had to miss Christmas a couple years because it's a very extended process, and this is coming from a Canadian where it's based on country of birth, the amount of time you have to wait, and it's very easy for us. There are people again from India and China; they have to wait a decade to get this stuff. But finally got my green card, and after 5 years after getting your green card, you can apply for citizenship. So I'm in that waiting period right now.
Nice. When do you expect to hear back about the citizenship?
So you can't apply until 5 years after you get the green card. So assuming I did it as soon as I could.
Oh, you just got it.
Yeah. So I'm in I've had the green card for 4 years or something. So I'm getting close. And I haven't really looked into it, but it's my intention to do that. And I think, you got to write some tests and do interviews and stuff. But yeah.
With all the stuff happening with the H1B1, is that it?
H1B. I think the 1 or a 2 is basically if it's your visa or if it's your spouse's visa.
Got it. Yeah. Do you have thoughts on that? I mean, one of the things that I found, thanks to X, is that there's a lot of stuff that I never thought about, never knew anything about, and suddenly it's being discussed. And I think overall that's a really good thing. Like I didn't know about these visas. My dad is an immigrant, but he came over in the 70s and he's a butcher. It's not like he was a coder or anything like that.
Yep.
But like with the H-1B visas, do you what are your thoughts on it? Just in general, are you allowed to share your thoughts on it?
Yeah. I mean, as far as I know, I think in general, I think H-1B visas are a very good thing, but they are implemented poorly. So I think a crux of immigration, and this is part of what gets lost, right? Like you want immigrants, you want people who want to come here and work hard and become part of society, and you want people who are bringing things to society that you need, right? And so to go back to that first visa I was talking about, the NAFTA one, if you weren't in one of those 15 professions that the US basically said, we don't have enough of these people, you can't get that visa, right? So I think it's important, but I think the issue is in the implementation. There are a lot of flaws in the implementation. Like the fact that it's a lottery, that's ridiculous. Like you have really smart people who are working hard, contributing to society, trying to get into those visas, and they just can't do it, right? So I think there needs to be changes there. But I mean, I noticed, right? So Trump talked like he was going to make changes to it in his first presidential sitting, but now it was the first issue where you finally got some pushback on that side because Elon Musk has some strong opinions on. Obviously, he's an immigrant as well. So yeah, I think it's a great and important program, and I think it's a very important visa as part of kind of your overall immigration policy. But current setup is a train wreck.
Yeah, and one of the things that I had heard some criticism of it is in regards to salaries. Where is it the case where immigrants who are applying or taking on those visas are being paid below market value for for those jobs? Because maybe that's the just the initial question.
Yeah, so that was a huge problem. And so there were companies in India that were putting thousands and thousands of people into this, and basically, like I obviously you don't want to have a program that basically exists to bring in people who will do the same job an American has for less money, right? Like that is the opposite of what you're trying to do. You're trying to bring in people that whose skills you need. And this one company, thousands and thousands of people, and they were really just trying to undercut American workers. And again, when it's a lottery system, so I'm one person in that lottery, right? I get one say or one ballot or whatever it is. Well, now they have 50,000, right? So my odds are whatever the number was, but like my odds just plummet because of stuff like that. So I would like to see a system where large organizations that have people they want to bring here, they should have to prioritize the people they want to bring here. It shouldn't be, oh, well, anyone in our UK office might want to come here, so let's put them all on the list. Like each company should get to pick, whatever it is, 10 people, 20 people, and these are our important people and we need them to come here.
Yeah. There's a guy I follow. He's a sci-fi writer, Derek. Is it Derek? Yeah, Derek Erickson. Is it Derek Erickson? Yeah, Devin Erickson. Excuse me. Sorry, Devin, who was a guest on the on my podcast. And he'd written this thing that it was the first time I had heard this perspective, but it was the idea is, just because you're a company, it's not your right to basically decide who gains entry into the country. Yep. So the idea that because you have these jobs, that therefore you get to say, okay, we want this person from this country, this person from this country, where the idea being that the sovereignty of the United States supersedes whatever the company's needs are. And I thought that was an interesting way to frame the discussion, in particular when you have a lot of the companies that are tech related, where you have these global companies where it's like you could very well hire all of those Indian workers and have them stay in India and have them work that way. Now the question is, is that a is that a plus or minus to the United States if you are offshoring labor as opposed to, having it, inside the country.
Yeah, and I mean, so that in my industry as well. So any multinational, again, when Trump first came in, like there were major changes to the tax system because he was trying to get money basically out of outsourcing and bring it back to the United States, right? And that had very significant implications for your ability to do business elsewhere. But yeah, I mean, I think it's one of these things too, right? Like people think, oh, I'm a hardworking immigrant in any country. I can come here and it's the American dream and all this, and I can get these visas. And sure, well, technically that's true. Hire an immigration lawyer and see how much that costs, right? Like these big companies have relationships with immigration lawyers, and they know exactly what they're doing. And they don't make mistakes on your forms. They know exactly what you need to submit and all this stuff. And if you're an individual, that's not the easiest system to tackle. So as a result, you certainly have a bias with a lot of these visas going to larger companies just because they have the resources to get people through the process.
Yeah. And so in your line of work, actuary, so you're an actuary by day, comedy by night, or do they flip? Do you under the moonlight? Do you actuary and?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very fortunate that I have a job that lets me do both. But somebody said, "Oh, you must be the funniest actuary in the world," and I said, "That's probably true, but I also probably was before I ever started doing stand-up because actuaries tend to be pretty dry, right? Pretty serious topics and not a lot of humor." But
So what is an actuary? What do you do?
So basically, actuaries do a lot of mathematical risk analysis. So most actuaries would work at life insurers or health insurers, basically figuring out what to charge for premiums or valuing the policies that already exist. I work more in the pension space, and particularly as it relates to investments as my day job. So, figuring out what the liabilities of the pension look like, how they're going to change over time, and how you can invest your money so that you are protected and don't have to put additional money in to cover your liabilities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, on the life insurance front, here's just a little advice for everybody: don't make jokes when you're being interviewed about life insurance, because it was a couple of years ago. I was working. I had a job. They provided a little bit of life insurance, and then I wanted to get a bigger coverage. So I ended up talking with. I'm not going to tell you who, because they don't sponsor me. But they had asked, "Oh, do you smoke?" And I'm not a smoker. And I said, "Oh, well, I mean, I tried once when I was 19. I had one cigarette, and because of that, they need to mark me down as a smoker."
Yeah, if you think actuaries don't have a good sense of humor, underwriters have no sense of humor when it comes to that stuff. Like, obviously, that's ridiculous. But
yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know how many dollars a month that's cost me. Maybe it's cost me the equivalent of a pack of cigarettes a month. But yeah. I'm like, I was like, are you serious, man? Like,
well, it's funny too, because that's exactly what life insurers are trying to avoid, right? Like, basically, a lot of the game in life insurance is, if you can find an innovative new factor that is like a determinant of whether people will get disabled or pass away or whatever it might be, right? That gives you an advantage in segmenting the population. Because sure, okay, they charge you more, which obviously sucks for you. But if they charge you too much, you'll say, screw this and just go somewhere else, right? And they don't want that either. So yeah, that's bad underwriting in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm say like $95 a month or something like that, and if I croak, my family gets a good chunk of money. So good on them.
Yeah.
I don't know what the details are as far as like if the manner in which I die. I should probably look into that.
Usually there's a clause if you die in an accident or something, it'll like triple or quintuple the payout. But
yeah. So if if anybody has any if any of my enemies have any plans for me, just make it so that at least my family makes some money out of it.
Oh yeah. Do it the old Acme style with an anvil, just right off the roof. That's the way to go.
Exactly. I remember before the election, you and I were talking a little bit about possible dangers on the horizon and preparing oneself for it. I guess as an actuary, I mean, you are doing that to to a great degree. I feel better now after Trump won. I feel like we have diverted a lot of calamity. I couldn't imagine another 4 years under a Harris administration.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, certainly in the investments industry, right? Like it's unique in the sense that every 4 years everything can change, right? And obviously the Republicans are more pro-business and the Democrats are not, so that has significant implications. Like on election night, you could watch coverage of all the major networks, but I was watching Bitcoin futures, and if they were going up, and as the night went on, they went higher and higher and higher, and that's how I knew Trump was going to win, right? So. Usually the markets are a pretty good indicator of what's going to happen before it happens. But
yeah. So I'm trying to get free advice out of you. What are at least a couple of things you think people should invest in, like long term?
I mean, a lot of it has to do with your age and your risk tolerance, right? But definitely if you have the ability to access a 401k or any other type of like tax advantaged vehicle, go in through that. And it's one of these things, if you really want to dive into it and look into individual stocks and all that stuff and devote a lot of your time to that, you may be able to get an edge or you may not, and it's a long game, right? You'll have good years and bad years, but for a lot of people, just if you just invest in the index and put your savings away each month and come back in 40 years or whatever it is, you're going to be in a very good position. So yeah, and obviously the older you get, the more you want to shift away from equity and more towards fixed income, just because if there were a big drop in the market, you don't have as much time to make it up. Whereas when you're younger, you can take on more risk. But again, it's got to be what people are comfortable with. And some people are gamblers out there and some people want to play it really safe. And, most retail investment organizations have the ability to basically customize it however you want to do it. So it's really just about you and what you're comfortable with.
Yeah. I wonder what role AI is going to be playing when it comes to investments, because I know there's I don't know the guy's name, but he has this program where it basically just tracks whatever Nancy Pelosi is investing in, and you can kind of piggyback that, and it seems like she makes really good moves.
That is the most outrageous thing. Like, if I had to pick one thing that they should change in the US, the ability of government officials to basically insider trade is disgusting. Like, it's shocking. And of course, like, Nancy Pelosi can make those trades, but if somebody front ran her trades, like let's say she has an investment person who she tells, hey, make this trade. Well, that person could take that information and make the same trade, right? That person would go to prison for front running.
Wow.
But yeah, so it's pretty infuriating. But yeah, AI, interesting. I think the jury is still out on AI and what its exact implications are going to be, right? Like, part of the reason or a contributing factor to sort of the straw that broke the camel's back in the 2008 financial crisis was the use of algorithmic trading by all the big banks, right? So I think AI is a little bit like that. Like, if implemented well with the proper constraints, it could be a huge advantage. But, if AI is just allowed to go rogue and suddenly you have massive positions being taken, particularly on the short side, very dangerous for capital markets.
Yeah. I wonder, AI is, infiltrating, every aspect of life, the creative arts. I've read, some good commentary, or at least hopeful commentary when it comes to the creative arts where, ultimately, AI will not be able to do what we do or what great filmmakers do, et cetera. And I'm thankful for that. I do wonder if AI will work to a point where it's just sort of everybody's like kind of basic needs are met, and not basic needs in like nutrition, et cetera, just like basic needs where whatever they need to just kind of feel comfortable and sedentary, and and not aspire, not reach for reach higher. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's I don't know. So are you concerned about basically people losing the ability to do things that AI can do? So for a great example, right? So there's rampant cheating in universities because people are just using Chat GPT, right? And in the business world, you can't really use it, but like, companies are trying to basically make their own version of it, right? So to have an in-house thing. And I think it's a really interesting one from a learning perspective, right? Like, it's really important to have the skills to be able to write and express yourself concisely and, in a way that can persuade others. And are we going to lose that skill? I don't know. I think that's a real risk. But to be fair, like, I think I always get the philosophers mixed up, but Plato, it went Plato and then Aristotle, right? And I think Plato said human beings will never write stuff down because we'll lose our ability to remember. And the reason I know that is because Aristotle wrote it down. So, like, it's,
Plato, whether he existed or not, as a character, well, he should be very happy that we wrote it down. Otherwise,
yeah, it's 100%.
Although we owe more to Plato than he does to us.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
Well,
but
Plato, Plato, Socrates, yeah. So it was like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I hear what you're saying. I was even occasionally on X, you'll have these memes of these math equations, and there was one that popped up the other day, and I was looking at this, and I was so confident that I had the right answer. I think, oh yeah, the answer is 16. Yeah, it's 16. This is how we do it. It turns out the answer was 4, and I'm like, oh my God, I've been so out of the game that I forgot. Was it PEMDAS?
Yeah. So we call it. We were taught BEDMAS, but it's the same thing, and that's you want to talk about misinformation on social media. That is a shocking one, because you will see people post the wrong answer, and I'm like, we can't even agree on the order of operations anymore. Like, things that have been in place for centuries. So yeah,
they'll find a way to find it. And I mean, my favorite. Because that's the one who, okay, I don't like that because that makes me look stupid. But then you have the other ones where it's like 2 + 2 doesn't always equal 4. And and it's like, oh, come on, man. What are we doing?
Yeah. So those are fun as a mathematician, because usually they make a really simple mistake very early in the calculation that if you don't know, you could pick off. And, I've done enough math where I'm like, all right, I see where the mistake is. But otherwise, yeah, you can pretty much convince people that 1 doesn't equal 1, right?
Yeah. And what is it like day to day, with math? I mean, do you do exercises just to keep yourself going? Because I'm sure, while you're a math, a math major and a professional mathematician, I'm sure your work has sort of directed you into one way of doing math, or at least, so how
So I have friends who are in academia, and they are much more involved in sort of like the cutting edge theoretical side of math. I would say from a business standpoint, like all the equations that you need to value a pension, for example, that's all set in stone, right? So we have programs that do those calculations, and obviously you're checking the programs to make sure that, things aren't coming out wrong and there's a mistake. But a lot of what we do has to do with setting assumptions for things like expected returns, discount rates, even for pension, like how much is somebody's salary going to go up over their career. And so I think that's, a lot of what actuaries do has to do with assumptions, and, good actuaries make better assumptions. So.
Yeah. And I mean, for a while there, under Biden, we were talking about a possible World War III, which isn't good for anybody. Even though I know there are a lot of people who make money off of war, but I don't think that's very good. In the end, I don't think it's that good. So yeah, I mean, how do you take into account, things like that? What's it, black swans, like that sort of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. You've got to do scenario analysis. You never know what's going to happen. So sure, if even just the war in Ukraine, right? Like, that had significant impacts on global financial markets, particularly in the EU. What's going on between Israel and Palestine, that has implications. So yeah, you're building that into your analysis, but you have to build it in with a grain of salt, right? Like, you're doing all that analysis, but then you have to say, what are the odds that this is actually going to happen, right? And so a lot of what we do, it's always like frequency times severity. So how often does this thing happen? And if it does happen, how bad is it? And that's kind of at its corest form, that's kind of the crux of being an actuary, right?
Yeah. And do you take that, well, I mean, in a way, like do you gamble in other aspects, or do you even consider that gambling?
So I would never gamble in a casino. I would play poker because poker is a game of skill where you can outsmart your opponent. But one that drives me up the wall. So there's been a huge influx in sports betting, right? And you can do it on your phone and all this stuff. So you should never, ever take a bet where the person on the other side of the bet knows more than you do. Like they have teams of guys who are going through all of this stuff. And one that drives me up the wall is parlays. So you're familiar with parlays?
No. Can you?
So a parlay is basically, let's say a normal bet is like, I'm going to bet on the New York Jets to win, and you're going to bet on the New York Giants to win. And, we'll see what happens and we'll settle our bet, right? So a parlay would be basically a bet that has multiple legs to it. And if you hit all of those legs, you get a massive payout. But if just one of those legs doesn't come through, you lose the bet. So a good example in football would be, instead of betting on the Jets, now I'm betting on the Jets, the Bills, the Chiefs, the Saints, and the Falcons to all win their games, right? And the reason betting companies love these is so their business is, let's say something's a 50-50 bet, right? So if I bet $2, half the time I win and I get $4 back, and half the time I lose and I get nothing, and that would be a fair game. Well, so what they do is, if I win, instead of giving me $4, they'll give me $3.50. And if I lose, I still get nothing. So now that's no longer a fair game for me. That's a game where I'm losing in the long run, right? And the problem with a parlay is, so you take that spread, that 50-cent spread, and now you multiply it 5 times, and that spread gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So there's a reason they want you to play parlays, because it seems like, oh, I'm going to bet $1 and win 10,000. And in reality, sure, that might be true, but the fair bet should say you should win 15,000. And if you play long enough and have a big enough book, which these guys obviously do because they're playing it millions of times across millions of users, they're eating your lunch, basically. But people don't realize that.
Yeah. I think I'm very fortunate that I've never gotten into gambling. One time in Vegas, probably like 20 years ago, I put, I think maybe like $20 on something, and I lost immediately. And I was like, okay, I'm out.
Yeah. And I mean, that's like, gambling is a serious thing. Like, I know people who've lost their life savings doing it, and I despise losing money, which is probably why I'm an actuary and risk averse. Like, but yeah, I mean, you have to be so careful and have limits and all that stuff, and so much discipline, because if you don't, you're gonna have big problems.
Yeah, if you're gonna have if I had to pick a vice to have, not gambling. No hard drugs. Alcohol sounds like a really bad idea. Cheaper though. Not that, alcohol's not that expensive. I mean, it would probably be like, maybe out of all the vices, sex might be the best.
I was going to say sex addiction. I mean, so, they have a version of like Alcoholics Anonymous for sex addicts. And they had problems because people were showing up who weren't really sex addicts. They were just trying to hit on people, and they're
just trying to get laid.
Yeah, exactly. So they had to screen them out. So that sounds like, yeah, it's one of the ones that doesn't sound that bad, but
yeah, I guess like if you lost your life savings betting on the Jets, people would just look at you like, what the fuck? But if you manage to lose your life savings on sex, like you got to have some amazing stories.
I mean, at least you had fun along the way, right? You probably didn't even enjoy watching the Jets game, but
yeah. Like, you didn't even orgasm like during the Jets game. Peter, before I leave you, so what I often find is that my favorite Americans tend to be foreigners who become American, and I'm very happy that you are on your journey to become an American. And I guess maybe just leaving on like a more patriotic note, but like, what does American mean for you, like to be an American, because you're going to become an American,
Yeah, I mean, for me, like, America is truly the land of opportunity, and it doesn't matter if you're looking at being an actuary or trying to be a comic or whatever you aspire to do in life. There are more opportunities here, and you can make it bigger, you can make more money doing it, all that stuff. Yeah, I mean, I like Canada. All my family lives in Canada. Most of my friends still live in Canada. There are aspects of Canada that are great, but long term, I would rather be here, just because there's more opportunity. It's also very unique. People always say, "Oh, North America is only 3 countries," which is crazy when you think about Europe. But like, particularly in the last couple of years politically, you do notice that it really is 50 states, right? And if you don't like it in New York, we'll go to Florida. And if you don't like it in Florida, then go to Louisiana or wherever you want to go, right? So yeah, plus the weather's a lot better, which as a Canadian, that's a big selling point.
Yeah, well, where I am right now, it's like, I think it was like 18 degrees out, not Celsius, Fahrenheit. But maybe that's, yeah, I have this, it's like East Coast amnesia where we forget every year just how cold it can get here. But yeah, well, Peter, thank you so much for joining me. And for those of you who want to see more of Peter, you can check out Comfy Comedy at the Comic Strip. And if you would like to see both me and Peter performing, check us out Saturday, January 25th, 8 p.m. at the Sparta Avenue Stage in Sparta, New Jersey, Sussex County.